Welcome to the Hyphen, Indian American Dialogues. I'm your host, Sital Kalantry. On February 28th, the United States and Israel went to war with Iran. The war has immediate repercussions for India, putting at risk the lives of 9 million residents who are from India in the Gulf. It's creating energy shortages in India, and it's also testing India's political allegiances. To help us unpack what's at stake for India in this war, we have Ambassador Mohan Kumar joining us. He is the former ambassador to France and Bahrain from India. Over his career, he's played a key role in multilateral negotiations at the GATT and WTO, as well as the Paris Climate Treaty. Ambassador Kumar is the Director General of the Motwani Jadeja Institute of American Studies and a distinguished professor at Jindal Global Law School. He is also the author of 2 books. Welcome to the Hyphen, Ambassador Kumar.
Thank you very much for having me. Great to be on your show.
So let me start by asking you, what is the latest developments today on March 13th in India in respect of this war?
So the latest development, at least to the best of my understanding, is that we have a full-fledged conflict ongoing in the Middle East. And the message from Tehran, as read out by the authorities of the supreme leader, the son of the late leader Khamenei, seems to be one of defiance. He has sent out 3 messages. One, that he would like to block or continue to block the Strait of Hormuz. That's the first thing, which will have its own impact on the movement of energy from the Gulf to countries like India. Second, he thinks that it's okay to attack the American bases in the Gulf. And third, he wants to avenge the death of martyrs in Iran. So frankly, at this point, Sital, I have to say the message is one of defiance coming from Iran. I was looking for some olive branch in the supreme leader's message from Iran. I did not see any. So at this point, a diplomatic solution looks difficult. So the situation looks tense, and there is no imminent breakthrough in sight.
And it could be ongoing for a while, particularly because it's not just one power that is a decision maker here. It's 2 powers, each of which might have their own different interests in both domestically and internationally. But let's focus on India. What are the repercussions for India? The both immediate, let's start with, and then long term.
So the repercussions for India are very grave and serious, I would have to say. I mean, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that India depends on energy imports. 80% of our crude oil comes from outside. We don't produce it ourselves. The Indian economy is still running on oil. It's not as if we have shifted entirely to renewable sources of energy. So crude oil or oil and petrol and diesel is really the backbone of the Indian economy. And if you do not have adequate supplies or assurance of supplies, then it tends to have a multiplier effect on the Indian economy in terms of food inflation. First it is fertilizer, then it is food, and then food inflation leads to other kinds of issues. So really the repercussions are great. So far, I would say we have managed it well. In fact, I was looking at the table. It's interesting. Gas prices in the US have gone up 20%. Would you believe it? In India, prices have gone up by 0%. But I'm not sure how long we can do this, because the government of India, as you well know, highly subsidizes petrol and diesel because it has implications for poor people. So I would say that the repercussions are serious if it continues. In the short term, I think we have a strategic petroleum reserve, and the oil minister is on record as having said we can get through. But we are talking weeks. We are not talking months. So if you define medium term as more than a month, then I think we all, not just India, I see major economies getting into trouble.
So let's just be clear. The Strait of Hormuz is where this narrow body of water through which India currently is getting a significant portion of its oil through the Gulf, and that is controlled, or Iran is controlling it and threatening and actually attacking the ships that pass through. So what we're hearing is that there's a significant shortages of gas. People are lining up for to fill their stove, the gas that supplies energy to their stoves. Is that accurate?
So, two things in response to that important point. It is true that there appears to be a shortage of what we call cooking gas cylinders, liquid petroleum gas, LPG gas cylinders, which is widely used for cooking. And there seems to be a manufactured shortage because the petroleum minister is on record as having said availability of supplies, but people are still queuing up. And this might be shortage mentality or whatever you want to call it. But on the other hand, I also want to say that as of yesterday and today, the Iranians are allowing Indian ships with oil supplies to sail through. And that's very interesting. We will come back to strategic autonomy and India's foreign policy of multi alignment and how we have dealt with this whole crisis. But I have to say, surprised that the Iranians have sent out a message saying, your ships are fine. So we've had at least two or three ships back and forth with energy supplies going through the Strait of Hormuz without being attacked by Iran. So I would have to say at this point, the Iranians are actually selectively targeting ships in the important choke point, which is called as Strait of Hormuz, which you explained well in your remarks. So people who haven't heard of this strait will now hear of this strait, because I was in Bahrain as ambassador, as you were saying in the introduction, and Strait of Hormuz is right there. It's between Iran and Bahrain. And you have a fifth fleet, the American fifth fleet actually stationed in Bahrain precisely to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz remains available as a global public good. But because the area has been mined by the Iranians, and the Iranians have served notice that we will not hesitate attacking American ships, so far ships have been reluctant. But as I said, what is interesting to note for your viewers is that Indian ships, at least so far, appear to be going unscathed back and forth in the Strait of Hormuz.
That is really interesting, and that certainly will provide relief to energy shortages in India to the extent you're seeing them evolve. And I think that another new development that just occurred right today was that the U.S. government has given a waiver to India for 30 days from buying Russian oil, right? The interim trade deal happened. India agreed to stop buying Russian oil so that we can try to sanction Russia for the Ukraine war. But now that's going by the wayside, and perhaps that will alleviate some issues for India. What do you think?
I'm inclined to say it is the geopolitics stupid. Bill Clinton's advisor used to say it's the economy is stupid, but it is the geopolitics, right? I mean, look, you're absolutely right. We did make some commitments to the American side in the run up to the conclusion of the deal. And by the way, the deal has not been signed yet. But it is true what you say. We did say that we will at least try and diversify our oil supplies. And we were doing that when this happened. And this event, Professor Kalantry, has to be seen as a force majeure. I don't think you can see it as a normal course of event that has happened. The US-Israeli bombardment of Iran and what has happened after is a force majeure. So the Americans have said you can continue to buy Russian oil at least for 30 days, as you say. But the more important thing for me is the conversation that the Americans are having with Russians. As we speak, I know both sides are talking, and there is a lot of speculation, in at least sitting in Delhi. I hear that the Americans are on the verge of lifting sanctions on Russia, and that they would want Russian oil to actually move quite freely out of Russia. If that were to happen, that would be considered a political earthquake in Europe because of the conflict in Ukraine and how the Europeans see Russia. But it's a fact that the Americans and Russians are talking, and we will see what happens in terms of the outcome. But it seems to me that at least for as long as the conflict lasts, it's hard to see India not buying Russian oil, at least some Russian oil, because of the situation in which we all find ourselves in.
Now, getting to the question of, India's political kind of role in the world, right? You mentioned strategic autonomy. We've talked a little bit about how um, attacking Iran has these global repercussions, right? Between Russia, between India, China is apparently also now increasing its activities in the South China Sea. What does this say about how does this what bearing does this have on India's traditional role of strategic autonomy? And one, can you sort of describe that and whether you think that this war calls any of that into question?
Interestingly, I my own sense is that India will be more and more convinced that its policy, its foreign policy based on multi-alignment and based on the strategic autonomy, will actually strengthen rather than weaken. Because the one thing that this crisis teaches you is that you cannot rely on one power for your supplies, for your geopolitical needs, and for your strategic requirements. So, if there is one lesson that India will walk away, it is that we should continue on the path of this multi alignment. But in terms of strategic autonomy, I'd like to split it into two things, if you allow me. One is policy space. India, a country which has traditionally been a developing country with enormous economic challenges, will need policy space. When others don't need as much policy space, India will need more policy space. So, traditionally, when India says strategic autonomy, what it means is that India believes in acquiring as much policy space for itself as possible. I think the time has now come for India to put that policy space into use. And that
What do you
I
mean by
dis-
policy space?
so what I mean by policy space is that if other countries need, let us say, 100 million barrels of oil as petroleum reserve, hypothetically, India needs 300 just because of the number of poor people in India who rely on diesel, petrol, and so on. So a strategic petroleum reserve, which is much, much more than a normal developing country, that is policy space. Similarly, if you're talking about other countries trying to bring their economy back in a month or two, India will just need 4 or 5 months to do the same. So the real ability to actually do things is determined by the time and the effort you take, and that is policy space. But having acquired this policy space, you have to use this policy space now to engage in what I describe as strategic hedging. And that is what we are doing. We are hedging our bets now so that we would like oil, obviously, from US, because we have made some commitments that we will buy energy from the US. Qatar will still continue to be a major LNG gas supplier. And of course, we will rely on oil from wherever we can get it, including Russia. And that is, I think, hedging your bets. So it seems to me that rather than India being told, okay, strategic autonomy may or may not work, the last 3 days, I have a strong sense that if there is one thing that India will take away from this crisis, it is that hedging your bets and practicing strategic autonomy is just the best way forward for a country like India, which has enormous economic challenges.
Well, I mean, that is It's an interesting point that you're making. I wonder how you think it will land on the current US administration. Like prior administrations have looked the other way when India was playing nice with Russia, playing nice with Iran, with the Gulf. I mean, even now, right? If I understand correctly, India hasn't condemned Iran, for example. So this obviously this administration does not appreciate that. And how do you see, at least for the next 3 years, while we have President Trump in power, India continuing to play that strategic autonomy role might be problematic.
Correct. And that's a valid question. So, our policy vis-a-vis Washington, D.C., or the U.S. has been threefold, in my view. One, no confrontation. We're not going to confront US in any way, because I don't think we have the economic or the strategic clout to do that. At the same time, there is going to be no capitulation. We're not going to just fold. We are too big a country to do that. And third, we would like to say yes to conversation. So we are talking to the Americans all the time on these and other issues. So this is the trifecta, if you like, of India's policy vis-a-vis Washington, D.C. You say that we did not condemn the Iranian strikes, but we did not also condole the death of the supreme leader in Iran. A lot of people, the opposition parties in India, including the leader of opposition, Rahul Gandhi, his mother, Sonia Gandhi, have been criticizing the government, saying a head of state, whatever it is, a head of state in your neighborhood has died, and you have not even condoled the death. So the government is under pressure from domestic opposition parties. And of course, as you say, we abstain on many of these things in the UN. We have abstained. My sense is that as long as the US is talking to Russia itself and is talking about economic issues, it's talking about post Ukraine conflict issues of development. Already there are conversations between the American negotiators, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Dmitriev, who is who is Putin's negotiator for Russia. They're already talking about the economic deal that will happen post-conflict in Ukraine. As long as that conversation happens, I find it hard to see how anybody can quarrel with India purchasing oil from Russia. On the other hand, it is true in the past that we have brought down our imports of oil from Iran down to zero. We used to import a lot of oil from Iran. I'm now not talking about the Trump administration, but the previous administrations had told us, no, you shouldn't buy oil from Iran. So what I'm trying to portray to you is a complicated negotiation process that the Indians are having with the Americans, where we will say yes to some things, on other things we will resist, and on yet others we will try to find a way out through negotiations. I don't expect that process to be different, frankly, between India and the US. I think my sense is after the initial tariff war, and now, as you know, the punitive tariffs have been lifted on India, I think my sense is the Americans have a much better understanding of the economic and strategic compulsions of India. In terms of economic compulsions, I told you about the number of people who are poor and how we need energy. In India, energy poverty is almost equal, or is almost equivalent to economic poverty. Most people who suffer economic poverty will have no access to energy. That's just the way it is in India. But it is also true that we live in a rough neighborhood where we have adversaries. We're the only country which has two adversaries who are nuclear armed, Pakistan and China. So I think the Americans appreciate the kind of situation India finds itself in, a rock and a hard place. And therefore, I expect the Americans to actually be sympathetic and to be more understanding of India. My sense, at least now, is that I think the Americans realize the kind of situation India finds itself in.
And clearly, that's a new development because it's been months and months and months, sort of the trade deal dragged on and or negotiations dragged on, and then the punitive tariff was put in. And then there seemed to have been a breakthrough a couple of months ago, or maybe a month, 6 8 weeks ago. As soon as not long after Ambassador Gore arrived on the scene, and maybe that was one of the factors that pushed the interim deal along. But how do you think this deal, strokes that has been painted in regard to the deal, might be affected now, post Iran war, whenever that might be, or even now? I mean, I don't hear about any. Are negotiations underway, or is this sort of being put in the back burner right now until the war's over?
I think it's fair to say that the trade negotiators on both sides are talking. Today's statement by the Ministry of Commerce in Delhi says that we are still talking with the Americans on a deal. But it is also true that the Americans right now are distracted. Obviously, there are more important things, right? Including what is happening in Iran. And then there is this all important visit that President Trump is going to undertake to Beijing. That to me will be vital. 31st March to 2nd of April, he's going to Beijing and he will talking to President Xi Jinping of China. And that visit is being watched very, very closely by diplomats all over the world. And because the kind of background against which that visit is taking place is really interesting. China does not share America's goals when it comes to Iran. China does not share America's goals when it comes to Venezuela. China does not share America's goals when it comes to Gaza or Israel. So you have a, yes, or Cuba, absolutely. So a whole lot of divergences, if you like, strategic divergence. And for the two leaders to meet at that time, it'll be interesting to see whether they decide to paper over all those differences and see whether they can cement a trade deal, or are they just going to meet, eat, and then retreat and nothing much happens. So I think in the midst of all this, I would have to say that while the trade negotiators between India and US may be talking, I do not expect the signing of an imminent agreement. There is no prospect of an agreement being signed, say, next week or two. For that, I think things will have to settle down much more when it comes to Iran and other areas.
Now, moving to the human factor, what do you see happening with the 9 million or so Indian nationals that work in the Gulf area? My cousin as well is in Dubai. So, are they coming back? What are they in harm's way? What is India doing to protect them?
Excellent question, Professor Kalantri. As you introduced me, I spent 4.5 years in Bahrain as India's ambassador, and that gave me a vantage point about the 9 million Indians. I think the first thing to remember is that these 9 million Indians are, for the most part, Indian citizens. They're not like your Indian origin Americans who are Indian origin but obviously have American passports, at least most of them. So the fundamental difference in the Gulf is that the bulk of these 9 million Indians possess Indian passports. So the government of India has a legal obligation towards them. That's the first point. The second point I would like to make is that a wholesale evacuation of these 9 million people, God forbid, should something happen, is simply inconceivable. You are not evacuating a population, you are evacuating a country. 9 million is actually many countries of the world are 9 million. So a wholesale evacuation is impossible. So, what next? I think the only thing that can be done, we have requested authorities in these countries that listen, it's really up to you, and if we can request you to really make sure that these people don't come in harm's way. So we have left it to the authorities of these six countries. The six countries being Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and basically the six Gulf cooperation countries, and of course the United Arab Emirates.
Right. And the other important thing to note about these 9 or 10 million people or more is that they contribute $135 billion per year in remittances, which is, 35% of all the remittances India gets, right? A lot, much significant portion comes from the US, some from the UK. This is a potentially another negative repercussion that might follow if this crisis is prolonged. What do you think?
That is a valid point. And that is something that we will be extremely concerned about because, as you rightly say, these are people who go there and work, but most of the money, at least 70% of the salary drawn by each and every Indian citizen in the Gulf, is actually repatriated back to Kerala. If you belong to Kerala or if you belong to other places, then it goes there. And you're right in saying that India actually tops the list in terms of remittances. The World Bank has calculated that we actually India gets more remittances from the people from its nationals working outside than even Mexico and China. India actually tops the list. So this will be a source of big concern, not just for the families. And so for me, if the conflict continues, my worry I would always worry about their physical safety, but that I believe may not, hopefully, be such a big issue. The bigger issue for me is how there will be economic disruption in places like Dubai or in Bahrain or Kuwait. And because of the economic disruption, and whenever economic disruption happens in the Gulf, the first people to get affected are the Indians because they are obviously, in many of the menial tasks are performed by Indians, the drivers, the cooks, and those kind of things. Of course, there are professionals and others as well, but they may be cushioned and they may be able to survive without payment of salaries. But imagine if a company is told, or if a company tells its employees that, listen, there is war, we won't be able to pay you this month's salary or the next month, and we will pay you after. What is a manual laborer going to do? It's going to be extremely difficult. So that, I think, is a valid concern. And a lot of Indians, including our own decision makers, will be praying and hoping that the war doesn't continue indefinitely.
So this war has had repercussions on India, but also globally. In particular, though, what do you see the relationship between the U.S. and India evolving as a result of the war?
No, look, no matter what the relationship has been over the last, let's say, close to a year. February last year, Prime Minister Modi came to DC. He met President Trump and everything seemed hunky-dory, right? By July last year, things had gotten out of control and President Trump and the Trump administration slapped punitive tariffs on India in addition to the 25% tariffs. I think the two things which set the relationship back, one was the tariffs and the other was the claim by the Trump administration that they had managed to resolve the conflict between India and Pakistan and seemingly supportive of Pakistan. So that, I think, caused quite a bit of angst in Delhi and the relationship really had a setback. My sense is, since the arrival of Ambassador Gore, two or three things have happened. One, as you said in your remarks, the punitive tariffs have been removed, 25%. And the Supreme Court ruling has also helped India because the 25% is gone and it has been replaced by 10%. So I would have to say, as we speak, the tariff situation is quite comfortable for India, even vis-a-vis India's neighbors or India's competitors like Vietnam or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, and I'm not even talking of China. So the tariff situation is fine. The second thing that has happened, and the good thing that has happened is even at the height of the problems that we had with the US on tariffs, everything else was proceeding apace. And that is a good thing. So a lot of talks were happening on defense side, on the energy side, on just official level talks. The external affairs minister was talking to Marco Rubio, and the commerce minister was talking to his counterpart. So there is a multi-sectoral dialogue between India and the US, and there are as many as 28 sectors, believe it or not, 28 dialogues between the US and India. The only dialogue which was really stuck was the trade one. Everything else was actually happening. The only other thing I would say which has been put off is the Quad. And I'm just a little concerned that the quadrilateral grouping, which includes the US, Japan, India, Australia, which has got to do with the Indo Pacific region, that has not met. The summit was supposed to be in Delhi, and you had to have Trump come to Delhi. That has not happened, and I don't know when that is going to happen. So I would say, apart from trade, where I think things have picked up, the only other issue really is a question of President Trump coming to Delhi or the leaders finding a way to conduct the Quad summit so that the Quad can be given a fresh momentum. Right now, the Quad is just dormant. And I would say that that is an important forum for India. And we need to make sure that some impetus is given to that forum. But other than that, I'm happy to report that the sectoral dialogues between the US and India have continued at all levels. And I don't see any backsliding on those. And that's the good news, really.
Right. So it sounds like you're saying, look, you have the big obstacle in the road with the trade negotiations and the politics between the negotiations between India and Pakistan. But now it seems to be the war. This particular war doesn't have it isn't creating new obstacles in your view. You think that that relationship is continuing. What is your concern about the Quad? Why do you feel the Quad is important? These meetings between these four nations.
Right. So just to give your viewers a little bit of perspective, the idea of the Quad emanated from the late Japanese leader Shinzo Abe, who talked of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean as not two different theaters or two different seas, but actually joined together by one sea. So he is the one who actually, in an address to the Indian Parliament, talked of the term Indo-Pacific. Since then, the Americans bought into it, and we no longer, at least the Americans and Indians now no longer use the term Asia Pacific, we use the term Indo-Pacific. If you talk of the Indo-Pacific theater, while the Americans and the Japanese and the Australians are heavily invested in the Pacific theater, the Indian Ocean is of enormous importance to India. After all, it carries India, but more than that, it is really, so to speak, our backyard. So Indian Ocean is extremely important for India. And without the Quad, it would be very difficult for India to monitor what is going on in the Indian Ocean. It is for that reason that we have actually gone outside the Quad and we have tried to have a partnership with France, for example, Germany, Europe. They also have their own policy on Indo-Pacific. So the Quad is important mainly because India wants to make sure that the Indian Ocean remains free for movement of global public goods, and a lot of energy comes through the Indian Ocean. Of course, the Strait of Hormuz is the focus of all attention now, but actually the Indian Ocean should be too, because the Indian Ocean also has very vital sea lanes of communication which carry energy and commerce. And two-thirds of all energy, two-thirds of India's commerce and China's as well, actually goes through the Indian Ocean. So I cannot overemphasize the importance of the Indian Ocean for India. So that is the reason why Quad assumes tremendous importance.
Right. And it seems like the US right now that's not of great value to them. They have not resurrected it. And yes, and I hope they do. And India brings that. I'm sure they're bringing that to the conversation each time they meet. So let me ask you this final question. Now I know that you don't have a crystal ball and you can't figure this out, but you have been a diplomat for over 30 years and one in the Middle East as well. So you're very attuned to the politics of Iran and the politics of that region. What do you see as the future?
So, two or three scenarios, and I have to frankly tell you that it's very hard. I've talked to as many people as possible, and nobody is able to get a fix on how this issue will play itself out. So, one particular scenario that is being talked about is that within the next 1 week or 10 days, President Trump and the Trump administration declares victory, and they will have two particular achievements to call it a victory. To be fair, one, they could conceivably argue that all ballistic missile ability of Iran has been destroyed. I don't think people will believe it if they said we have completely destroyed Iran's ability to make a nuclear bomb, because for that you would have to go into Iran and remove all the uranium, the enriched uranium. That is not an easy task. But you can conceivably claim that Iran's ability to produce missiles and defense equipment has been destroyed. The second thing that you can claim, the Americans can claim credibly, is that Iran's ability to use proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah and Houthis, that Iran has been defanged and defenestrated. You can make that claim conceivably, and then declare victory and say that, listen, we will now end this war, and so on. The only problem I see with that scenario is that Iran might say, you think you're ending the war, but we would like to carry on. And then you have a problem, especially in the Strait of Hormuz, because the key to ending this conflict now is how can you get the Strait of Hormuz to go back to status quo ante, and ships can start sailing. It is only then that people will say normalcy has been restored. The other problem I see, Professor Kalantri, is that the goals of Israel and US at some point may start to diverge. So far, the US and yeah, so far the US and Israel appear to be in lockstep. But there will come a time, and Israel will not mind going on and on, but the US will have concerns. And the concerns will be, I think you hinted it in your remarks, one will be the inflation. After all, the gas prices have already gone up in the US. And I don't know, you are a better judge, you and your colleagues, as to how much punishment or how much sacrifice the Americans are capable of for the sake of defanging Iran. I'm not sure about that. The second thing would be the crucial midterm elections. What happens in the run up to the midterm elections? Do you want people to be unhappy about inflation, etc.? We don't know. So, and that will not
And
be
also,
the
it's the interest rates, right? Interest rates, mortgage rates are at an all-time high. It is also, affordability, other affordability. Now you've added gas increasing by 20%. So I think there are multiple issues and the stock, not to mention the stock market is yo-yoing. So yeah.
right. And the last point I'll make is also that President Trump's base, called the MAGA, for want of a better word, is also appears to be divided. Maybe there is still a bulk of people or a bunch of people who will say we support President Trump no matter what. But there are other important voices now, I find, who are saying that, listen, why are we going into this war? After all, the manifesto on which President Trump got elected was that we will not have these forever wars and so on. So there is that divergence as well. I don't know how serious that divergence is. Sitting in Delhi, I'm not able to tell you that. But I think all these factors will come together. So to answer the most difficult question that you've posed to me as to what I think in terms of the time period, I would say a maximum of 1 month from where we are now, and hopefully much earlier, we should see a denouement of this conflict one way or the other. Frankly, I cannot see it going. I would keep an eye out also for activities of countries like Oman, which have been traditionally the go between for America and Iran. So there are countries like Oman which would offer their diplomatic services, and they will probably take messages back and forth. The last thing I will say also is one has to also keep in mind whether the Iranian people also accept this kind of sacrifice and punishment. It's not easy for them. They were out in the streets 2, 3 months ago against their own government, but now they are afraid, frankly, because they can't even go to the streets and protest because the bombs are falling all over the place. So we will also have to keep in mind the ability of the Iranian population to accept punishment. So I think you have a number of imponderable factors, but give or take 1 week, I would say max a month. Otherwise, the global economy will be in serious trouble.
Well, I certainly hope that you're right. I hope it ends sooner, and I am glad to hear from such a renowned expert as you that you don't anticipate this going further than I guess it's mid-March now, mid-April or so. Because you're right, I think that it will have severe repercussions on the U.S. and globally. So I really want to thank you so much for taking your time to join us. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I learned a lot.
Thank you very much for having me on your show. I want to thank you. I want to thank your colleagues for giving me this amazing opportunity. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this episode of The Hyphen, please share, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you to our producers, Ashin Jagtiani, Shannon Young, and Social Sherpa. I also wanted to give a big thanks to our media partner, India Abroad.